The battle had descended into chaos. Dark magic crackled through the air, and the relentless assault of the enemy was threatening to overwhelm the defenders. Gunnar stood on the battlefield, Starbreaker in his grip, his muscles tense as he assessed the shifting tides of war. He could feel the weight of the moment, the enemy's sheer numbers, their brutal siege engines, and the oppressive darkness creeping closer. Beside him, Alpha prowled, his sleek form moving like a shadow across the bloodied ground. The dire wolf growled low, sensing the rising danger. Together, they were watching the enemy tighten its grip around the castle. This was the moment. The time to merge. Gunnar and Alpha shared a look, one filled with unspoken understanding, an acknowledgement of the primal bond that connected them. The air seemed to thicken, and a charge filled the space between them. As Gunnar inhaled, his senses began to shift, aligning with Alpha's predatory instincts. His heart raced in sync with Alpha's, their breaths becoming one. From the castle's walls, Derren and the sisters watched in silence, the strange energy that suddenly surrounded Gunnar making their skin tingle with anticipation. Derren had seen Gunnar do a lot of crazy things, but whatever this was, it was different. Darker. More primal. "What the hell's going on?" Derren muttered, his usual sarcasm momentarily replaced by genuine confusion. Before anyone could answer, the transformation began. Gunnar's body tensed, and in an instant, the bond with Alpha flared to life. The merge was unlike anything else in battle. Gunnar could feel the shift in his muscles, the surge of strength that wasn't purely his. His vision sharpened, colours becoming more vibrant, smells becoming more distinct as he gained Alpha's heightened senses. He became faster, more agile, his reflexes fine-tuned to a predatory edge. It wasn't just power, it was raw, animalistic synergy. Lissandra watched from the ramparts, her hands gripping the stone as memories flooded back. She had seen this once before, when Gunnar had fought her father. The way he had moved, the power he had wielded, the way the tide had turned. Even now, after all those years, the sight of it sent a chill through her. This merge was a force of nature, unstoppable and terrifying. But Velara and Nezra, standing nearby, had never seen anything like it. Their eyes were wide, their breaths held as they watched Gunnar's body ripple with enhanced strength. The air around him shimmered with the merging of energies, human and beast intertwined in perfect harmony. Alpha growled, his eyes glowing with the same predatory intensity as Gunnar's. They moved together, in complete sync. And then, Gunnar struck. With lightning speed, Gunnar darted across the battlefield, Starbreaker firing in rapid succession. Each round exploded into the enemy ranks, sending bodies flying. His movements were impossibly fast, too quick for the enemy to track. A group of heavily armoured warriors rushed him, but they never stood a chance. Gunnar dodged their attacks with animal-like agility, delivering killing blows with his hidden silver dagger, now extended from his cybernetic arm. A giant troll lumbered into view, its eyes burning with dark magic as it swung a massive club down toward Gunnar. But in his merged state, Gunnar was a blur. He slid beneath the troll, severing its Achilles tendon with a swipe of his dagger before flipping up and driving Starbreaker directly into its back. The enchanted bullets ripped through the troll's hide like paper, and the beast crumbled with a deafening roar. Derren, still watching from the walls, was in awe. Is he even human anymore? He whispered to himself, unable to comprehend the sheer ferocity of Gunnar's attacks. I knew he was a badass, but this is insane. The sisters were equally stunned. Velara's griffins diving into the fight seemed almost slower compared to the fury of Gunnar and Alpha's assault. Even Nezra's wolves, powerful in their own right, looked tame beside the raw power the merged duo unleashed. The enemy breaks. As Gunnar and Alpha tore through the enemy lines, panic spread. The soldiers who had been marching forward with confidence now hesitated. The trolls fell back, The mage's spells sputtered in fear. They had never seen anything like this. An unstoppable force that seemed to predict their every move. A commander barked orders to regroup, but Gunnar was already on him. He moved like a shadow, slipping through the lines and driving Starbreaker into the commander's chest. The magical impact sent a ripple of shockwaves through the ranks. The remaining siege engines rolled into position, but Gunnar wasn't done. He loaded another high-explosive round into the 40mm launcher, aimed at the next engine, and fired. The explosion lit up the battlefield, sending burning fragments into the sky as the enemy's last hope for breaching the castle walls went up in flames. But it wasn't just the destruction that sent fear rippling through the enemy. It was Gunnar and Alpha, standing side by side, an unstoppable force that defied the very magic they had been sent to crush. Back at the castle, awe and resolve. The enemy's retreat had begun, but the battle was not over. Lissandra stepped forward, her voice steady despite the shock of witnessing the merge again. Now's our chance to push them back. Derren, still in disbelief, finally regained his usual demeanour. I'm starting to understand why Keebler doesn't stand too close to him when he's angry. The sisters, inspired by Gunnar's display, rallied their forces with newfound vigour. Velara's griffins and Nezra's wolves surged forward with renewed purpose, tearing into the enemy with a ferocity that matched their leaders. As the enemy faltered, Lissandra prepared her forces to make one final push. With Gunnar and Alpha leading the charge, there was no doubt in her mind they could win this. With Gunnar and Alpha leading the charge, the enemy forces buckled under the sheer power of the merged duo. The once confident army now scrambled to retreat as Velara's griffins and Nezra's wolves tore through their ranks. The battlefield echoed with the clash of steel, the cries of the wounded, and the roars of beasts fighting for survival. Derren, standing atop the battlements, yelled commands to the remaining forces. His voice, sharp and clear, carried over the chaos as the sisters' armies pressed their advantage. Lissandra moved with lethal precision through the shadows, her stealth fighters cutting down enemy mages and commanders before they had a chance to regroup. Gunnar, still merged with Alpha, was a blur of motion and destruction. The weight of the merge began to settle heavily on his shoulders, but he pushed through knowing the end was near. With every swing of Starbreaker, every snap of Alpha's jaws, the enemy was forced back, their morale shattered. The final wave of the enemy forces collapsed as Gunnar delivered a decisive blow, an explosive round that detonated among the retreating soldiers, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Tufa, the cleanup. As the last of the enemy fled into the wilderness, the battlefield grew eerily quiet. Bodies and wreckage littered the ground, the remains of a hard-fought battle. The air still hummed with the aftermath of magic, and the sky, once filled with dark clouds, began to clear as if signalling the end of the conflict. Derren climbed down from the ramparts, exhausted but victorious. He surveyed the battlefield, taking in the carnage and the cost of the fight. Velara and Nezra gathered their remaining forces, tending to the wounded and ensuring no stragglers from the enemy lingered. Lissandra approached Gunnar, her eyes flicking from him to Alpha. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but full of admiration. "Again." But Gunnar, still merged with Alpha, said nothing. He was breathing heavily, his body trembling with the strain of maintaining the bond. The merge had given him the strength they needed to win, but now it was taking its toll. The exhaustion. As the adrenaline of the battle faded, Gunnar's strength began to wane. His legs felt heavy, and his vision blurred as the weight of Alpha's instincts and power pressed down on him. He staggered slightly, but Alpha was there, moving in tandem with him as they slowly separated from the merge. The process was always draining, but this time, it felt like it was pulling every ounce of energy from him. Alpha, too, was exhausted, his once bright eyes now dull with fatigue. Derren approached, noticing the change immediately. "Gunner, you all right, man?" His voice was cautious, masking the concern he felt. Gunner nodded but didn't speak. He pressed a hand to his temple, the pounding in his head growing more intense as the bond faded. His arm, still covered in sweat and grime, trembled slightly as he reached out to steady himself. Lissandra, seeing the toll the merge had taken, moved closer. "Come," she said softly. "We need to get you inside." Gunner didn't argue. He let them lead him back toward the castle, Alpha limping beside him. Each step felt like a struggle, but as they passed through the castle gates, Gunner knew one thing for sure. They had survived, and for now the realm was safe. With the battle finally over, the exhaustion from the merge weighed heavily on Gunner. He slumped into a nearby chair in the great hall, struggling to stay upright. Derren and Lissandra moved quickly to his side, their expressions filled with concern. "Easy, man," Derren said softly, easing Gunner into a more comfortable position. "You're not made of stone, even if you fight like it." Lissandra knelt beside them, her face soft with concern. "You've pushed yourself far enough today. Rest now." Across the hall, Velara and Nezra tended to Alpha, who was just as drained as Gunner. The sisters worked quickly, offering water and food to the great dire wolf, their movements careful and respectful. Alpha's breathing was laboured, but his fierce eyes flickered with recognition as they cared for him. Gunner, still fighting to stay conscious, looked up at Derren. "What about the forces?" Derren gave a tired smile. "Relax. They're not going anywhere tonight. You've done enough. It's time to let the rest of us pick up the slack for once." Lissandra nodded, her hand resting gently on Gunner's shoulder. "We'll meet again in the morning. For now, the castle is safe, and our forces need to recover." Gunner sighed, the weight of the battle finally pulling him down. He gave a slow nod. "All right. Tomorrow, we finish this." That night, Gunner, Derren and Lissandra retire to rest, their bodies weary from the day's events. The sisters watch over their forces, ensuring that the beasts and creatures under their command are properly tended to. The promise of a final meeting looms in the air as everyone prepares for the decisive day to come. Gunner's reflection. Lying in the stillness of the night, Gunner's mind raced, despite his body's exhaustion. The merge with Alpha had taken more out of him than ever before. He stared up at the stone ceiling, replaying the battle over in his mind. The merge had been a necessity, but each time it felt like a deeper connection, pulling him closer to something primal. Could he continue to shoulder this burden? He thought of the pack and the promise he made to protect them, no matter the cost. Yet he also couldn't shake the image of Lissandra, standing so strong after the battle. She was no longer the frightened daughter of the demon king, but a leader in her own right. Her kingdom was healing, but now it was her leadership and the choices she made that would determine its future. Was this how his own path would end? Forever leading, always fighting. Derren's reflection. Derren leaned against the stone wall of his room, his eyes wide open as he stared into the darkness. "A freaking merge," he whispered to himself. He had always known Gunner was a badass, but what he had seen today was beyond anything he could have imagined. Gunner and Alpha weren't just a man and his spirit animal. They were something far more powerful. The battle had shaken Derren, but it also woke something up in him. For years he had brushed off the supernatural, his skepticism keeping him grounded. But now? After witnessing today's fight, he wondered if his own role in all of this was about to change. Could he keep up in a world where legends fought with tooth and claw? But then, the memory of the sisters' vulnerability came back to him. He had seen their hesitation, their uncertainty in the fight. That's where his skills came in. He could lead them, guide them, give them the confidence to win. That was his edge. The one thing that magic couldn't take away from him. Lissandra's reflection. Lissandra sat by the fire in her chambers, the glow of the flames dancing over her armour. She traced a finger over the silver dagger that hung at her side, Gunnar's dagger. The weight of it had comforted her during the battle, but it also reminded her of the cost of leadership. Her father had ruled through fear and control, and now she was trying to build something better. But doubt crept into her mind. Would her sisters ever fully trust her? Could they truly rebuild after everything they had been through? And what of Gunnar? This man who had saved her not once but twice. She saw the toll the fight had taken on him, and she feared what lay ahead. The kingdom was starting to heal, yes, but there were shadows still lurking, and the betrayal she sensed from her own blood haunted her. She was a ruler now, but was she ready for the burdens that came with that title? Velara and Nezra's reflection. Velara and Nezra sat together in their chambers, the firelight flickering between them. Velara's griffins had been victorious today, but Nezra's wolves had suffered heavy losses. They could still hear the howling of the wounded in their minds. Were they truly ready to stand beside Lissandra in this fight? Their father had controlled them for so long, and now they had to find their own way. Velara looked at Nezra, her voice soft. "Do we trust her?" Nezra sighed, staring out the window at the recovering kingdom. "We have to. It's not just about trust. It's about survival." The sun had barely risen and Gunnar was already up, stretching his stiff muscles. He groaned, rubbing his shoulder and casting a glance at Derren, who was still half asleep by the fire. "I'm getting too old for this," Gunnar muttered, shaking his head. Derren opened one eye, smirking. "Nah, you're just a little rusty. Maybe next time try merging with a chihuahua instead of a dire wolf." Gunnar chuckled, shaking his head. "If you ever actually fought a battle, you might know how that feels." As they both rose to their feet, Alpha padded up, nudging Gunnar's leg affectionately. Derren pulled out a set of MREs from his pack, handing one to Gunnar and setting another down for Alpha. "Breakfast of champions," Derren said sarcastically, tearing open the packet. "Bon appétit. Hope you enjoy your cardboard-flavoured chili." Gunnar smirked, opening his own MRE. "Can't be worse than the rations we had back in the day." Derren made a face, sniffing the MRE. "Oh, I beg to differ. They've somehow perfected the art of making this taste worse." As they sat down, Velara and Nezra entered the hall, looking somewhat refreshed from the night. Derren, never missing a beat, held out one of the MREs toward them, his grin wide. "Ladies," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "I present to you the finest culinary delight humanity has to offer. No magic required." Velara raised an eyebrow, inspecting the packet. "What is it?" Derren gave a mock bow. "This, dear Velara, is an MRE, meals ready to excrete." Velara wrinkled her nose and Nezra couldn't help but smirk. "It looks awful." "Oh, it is," Derren said, taking a bite. "Tastes like they mixed dirt and cardboard into a paste, dehydrated it then, threw in a bit of regret for flavour." Lissandra joined them, looking curious. "And yet you eat it." Gunnar chuckled. "It's a soldier's tradition. You hate it, but you eat it anyway." Alpha tore into his meal without complaint, causing Derren to glance at the wolf. At least someone appreciates the finer things. Takan. They sat around the table sharing stories and laughing as Derren continued to poke fun at the MREs, even managing to get Velara and Nezra to try a bite. The two sisters gagged in unison after their first taste, causing everyone to burst into laughter. "I think I'd rather fight the enemy again than eat this," Nezra said with a grin, wiping her mouth. Derren, sensing victory in the humour department, leaned back. "See? I knew you'd understand." It was a rare moment of levity, the tension from the battle fading away as the group bonded over the shared experience. For just a little while, they weren't warriors preparing for another fight. They were comrades, brought together by the absurdity of military food and a shared sense of purpose. The fire crackled softly in the great hall as the sisters Velara, Nezra, and Lissandra sat across from Gunnar and Derren. The levity from their earlier meal faded as Derren leaned forward, his eyes flicking between the sisters. "All right," he said, his tone shifting. "Since we're all here, let's talk about the elephant in the room." A tense silence fell over the group. Velara, the eldest, glanced at Nezra, her expression unreadable. Lissandra, the youngest of the three, sat with her back straight, though her nervousness was clear in the way her hands fidgeted in her lap. The elephant in the room wasn't just the threat of an army or the tenuous alliances forming, it was the deep-seated mistrust lingering between these three sisters. They may have fought together in battle, but the scars of their past, under the oppressive rule of their father, still ran deep. Derren leaned back, resting his elbows on the table, letting the silence grow heavy before breaking it. "You three need to figure out how to work together, or all of this will fall apart the minute another threat shows up. No amount of armies or magic will protect this realm if its leaders are divided." Velara's stand. Velara, her silver hair catching the firelight, crossed her arms defensively. Her sharp eyes cut to Lissandra, who sat quietly at the end of the table. "You think this is about us being divided?" she scoffed. "The problem is that we were never united to begin with." She straightened in her seat, her voice growing cold. "Our father ruled with an iron fist. He controlled every move we made. We followed him because we had no choice. Now Lissandra expects us to fall in line behind her." Lissandra flinched slightly but kept her gaze steady, meeting her sister's eyes. "I don't want to be like him, Velara. I'm not trying to control you." Nezra, who had remained quiet thus far, finally spoke, her voice calm but full of tension. "We don't need another tyrant, Lissandra. We need to trust that you won't become one." Lissandra's struggle. Lissandra swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her sister's distrust. Velara and Nezra were strong, experienced in leading their own forces of griffins and wolves, respectively. Lissandra, though the youngest, had been forced to grow up quickly in the wake of her father's death. She had fought alone for years, using stealth and cunning to survive the darkness that had threatened to consume their realm. But now that the darkness was receding, she wanted more than survival. She wanted peace, unity. And she knew deep down that it couldn't happen without her sisters. "I know I've made mistakes," Lissandra said softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. "But I don't want to rule like Father did. I want us to work together, lead together." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment there was only the sound of the fire crackling in the hearth. Derren's intervention. Derren glanced at Gunnar, who remained silent, watching the tension unfold. Then, with his usual flair for timing, Derren leaned forward, breaking the silence. "You know," Derren began with a smirk, "I've been around a lot of siblings. Let me tell you, it's never easy. But the thing is, if you don't trust each other, the enemy's going to use that against you. I've seen it happen in the field more times than I can count." He turned to Velara. "You've got your griffins, right? Badass creatures, by the way. But what happens if Lissandra's forces don't have your back when the fight gets tough?" Then to Nezra. "Your wolves are fierce, but there's always a bigger beast out there. You think they'll hold the line without help?" Finally, he looked at Lissandra. "And you? You've been on your own for years, but this isn't the time to go solo anymore." The sisters exchanged wary glances but said nothing. Derren continued. "The point is, you three need to start acting like a team, not rivals, because if you don't, the next time an army shows up, it's game over." Gunnar speaks. Finally, Gunnar spoke, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of his years of experience. "Derren's right. Trust isn't something you can demand, it's something you have to earn." He stood up, pacing slowly as he addressed the sisters. I've led teams through wars, through battles that felt impossible to win. And every time it wasn't our strength or our weapons that won the fight. It was the trust we had in each other. His gaze landed on Lissandra. You're not your father, Lissandra, but you have to show your sisters that. Words won't be enough. It's your actions that'll make them believe. The final agreement. Velara was the first to break the silence, her arms uncrossed, and she let out a slow breath. All right, she said quietly, looking at Lissandra. If you truly want us to lead together, then I'll stand with you. But this isn't blind loyalty. If I see you slipping into father's ways, I'll stop you. Nezra nodded in agreement. We stand together, or we fall together. No more divisions. Lissandra smiled faintly, the relief evident on her face. Agreed. Sans Derren's closing remark. Derren, sensing the tension dissolve, leaned back with a playful grin. Well, that was almost too easy. I was expecting more drama. Maybe a few more explosions or someone to flip a table. Velara raised an eyebrow at him. You seem disappointed. Derren shrugged. What can I say? I live for the chaos. The sisters shared a small smile, the first real sign of unity among them. The battle had been hard fought, but the negotiations, as tense as they were, had forged something stronger. As they stood, the promise of rebuilding the realm, together, finally felt real. Chapter 21. Departure and Farewells. With the negotiations finally concluded, Gunnar stood, his imposing presence commanding the room. The sisters, now unified, looked to him for final words before their departure. You've done well, Gunnar said, his voice steady. This realm will heal, but if you ever need help, know that I'm just a call away. He reached into his pack, pulling out 3 intricately designed talismans, each glowing faintly with an ancient magic that Eli had infused with power. He handed one to Velara, Nezra, and finally to Lissandra. These will allow you to contact me directly, should the need arise. The sisters accepted the talismans with gratitude, recognizing the weight of the gesture. Velara clasped hers in her hand, nodding in understanding, while Nezra examined it with quiet respect. Lissandra smiled softly, a look of relief crossing her features as she tucked the talisman away. Gunnar then turned to Derren, who had been watching the exchange with a raised eyebrow. Derren, never one to miss an opportunity, smirked. So, where's mine? I feel left out of the whole fancy necklace club. Gunnar chuckled, shaking his head. You'd lose it in 5 minutes. Derren shrugged. Fair point. Eliana's portal. With a brief nod, Gunnar stepped away, contacting Eliana Vale through his own talisman. Within moments, a shimmering portal materialized before them, casting a soft light that contrasted with the war-torn hall. The sisters exchanged final farewells, each expressing their gratitude for Gunnar and Derren's help. There was an unspoken promise in their eyes, a newfound alliance, not just with each other, but with Gunnar as well. Lissandra lingered for a moment, her gaze meeting Gunnar's as the portal flickered. Thank you, Gunnar, she said quietly. For everything. Gunnar nodded. Lead them well. Back to Earth. As the portal shimmered around them, Alpha padded through first, followed by Gunnar and Derren. The transition was smooth, yet Derren couldn't help but glance back one last time at the realm they had helped unite. Stepping onto the familiar ground of their own world, Derren looked at Gunnar. So, no shiny necklace for me, but I get dragged to fight trolls and griffins. Fantastic. Gunnar gave a small, rare smile. You'll live.
All right, you've made it this far. That means either you like what you're seeing, or you're lost. Either way, no harm in sticking around, right? Go on, hit that subscribe button, join the team, and while you're at it, hit like. because, let's be honest, you're already invested. And the bell? That's for you if you don't want to miss any of the action. You wouldn't want me to come find you. See you soon. And remember, once you're in, you're family.